What's a story you don't tell people because they wouldn't believe it? When I was 11 years old, I always used to take a shortcut through the local graveyard at night when coming back from the arcade. One night there was a storm and the graveyard was muddy. I fell off my bike and hit my elbow and head, so I took cover under a gravehouse to check if I was bleeding or something else. It was already dark, but I could see 3 men carrying a bag and dumping it in an opened hole, then they proceed to cover it. I saw everything. When they left, I went to the guard's place and told him what I just saw. He told me to calm down and gave me a cup of milk and told me to stay there while he went to check for himself. When he came back, he looked at me and didn't say a word. He called the police, but when they arrived I heard him told them I was on drugs and that I was lying. I freaked out, so I jumped out of the window, over the fence, and ran home. They found a decapitated body 3 days later. I work security at a double lockdown, inpatient psychiatric hospital. We have several units that specialize in both chemical dependence and mental health disorders. My unit is the stabilization unit, SU, so if you're really off your rocker or you feel like getting violent, you come visit me. We get a call for a possibly violent patient and I go check it out. It's a very tall, very slender young girl wearing what can only charitably be described as rags. Her hair is unkempt and clearly has become estranged from shampoo, and she is covered from head to toe in filth that I'm praying is not her own. She's in rough shape, clearly sick, and needs some help. She doesn't respond to any verbal questions or commands, but we can lead her around pretty easily. I'm starting to wonder why they called me up. They tell me to put her on the SU, and a couple nurses are going to clean her up a little bit, put her in scrubs, and get her sorted out. They lead her into the shower, and the patient starts screaming. Then the nurses start screaming. Then everyone starts screaming. This poor young woman is covered in what are clearly human bite marks. Everyone is freaking out. The patient didn't want to be undressed and is lashing out wildly, so she had to be put in 4-point restraints, wrists and ankles tied to the bed. All the staff are in various stages of shock, crying, praying, rending of garments, etc. Someone had clearly been keeping this young, mentally ill girl captive and abusing her for quite some time. The bites are across her torso and appendages, and there are both new and old ones. The nursing supervisor immediately calls the cops and we just stand around staring blankly at each other, thinking about how messed up people are to each other, and the evil in this world. One of the nurses, who had been in psych nursing longer than I have been alive, suddenly yells, "You gotta be kidding me." The patient had craned her neck over and sunk her teeth into the meat of her upper arm, blood oozing from between her lips. We had to put a spit shield over her face to stop her from trying. All of the bites were self-inflicted. She was able to contort herself in ways that I didn't think possible. I still think about her a lot, and I don't think yoga is as sexy anymore. Most people don't believe me when I tell them I got stabbed in middle school, but to be fair, the scar on my stomach looks kind of surgical. This guy had been picking on one of my friends all semester in study hall. Then the teacher left and he threw a stapler at my friend, so I stood up. He walked over and punched me in the face. We started fighting. At one point he fell against the teacher's desk, grabbed something and swung at me, hitting me in the stomach. It didn't faze me too badly at the time because my 13-year-old adrenaline was pumping. I got him in a headlock right after that and ended the fight. Blood everywhere. Apparently he had grabbed an X-Acto knife and sliced me open a good bit. It was pretty deep, hurt like hell. As soon as I realized what had happened, had to go to the hospital. Here is the icing on the cake. Because of the zero-tolerance policy in the school, after there was an investigation to find out what happened and it was determined that we were fighting, I was put in ISS for the entire last week of middle school, for standing up for my friend and getting stabbed. I was also grounded by my parents. I was a homeless drug addict living in the streets of San Francisco. I lived outside for like 2 years. I ate out of dumpsters and injected drugs outside. I am married now. I have 3 kids. I just finished 2 years as the PTA treasurer, despite being a convicted felon. I tell some people my story. I don't bother with the majority. They wouldn't believe it. I don't tell this story because it's just a little too strange. Like a glitch in the Matrix. I am a skeptic by nature, BTW, and I do think it was a big coincidence, but it's just odd as hell. So one day I'm at home and I get a phone call. On the other end is a young woman and someone called her from this number and said they had her cat. Well, I told her she must have the wrong number because I certainly didn't call her and I don't have anyone's cat. So that was it and she hung up. About 10 minutes later I go to get my mail. I'm on the first floor, leaving my apartment door open, and as soon as I open the door to the vestibule, where the mailboxes are, in sprints a black and white cat into my apartment. I go back into my apartment and there's this cat sitting, perching, on the arm of my couch, staring at me. I'm kind of surprised at this point. I mean, I just told someone I didn't have any random cats in my apartment and suddenly there's one on my couch. Anyway, so I notice the cat has a tag on its collar. "Hi, my name is Skittles, not real name. If I'm lost, call 3034X. So I call the number. It's the young woman who just called me 10 minutes ago. "This is going to sound weird," I said, "but now I have your cat." Well, she came over, looked at me very suspiciously and thanked me and left. I have no explanation for this. I accept it's a coincidence, but it's a hell of a coincidence. 4 years ago when I read about people who flashed high-powered lasers up into the night sky and received responses from lights in the sky. I've always been interested in the possibility of extraterrestrials, but I didn't really ever think much of it. I preoccupied myself with reading science articles and let fantasy rest in my love of Asimov, Clarke, Bradbury and other writers. Grainy footage always looked pointless, because there was no way to tell if it was genuine or not. And it's so beautifully played out in the media that it's easy to dismiss this kind of stuff, usually some simple farmer talking about his cows being abducted. How could anyone take close encounters seriously? Why do so many abductees have to be sexually molested in the process? And so, people who claim to have seen UFOs are quite readily dismissed in spite of accounts from military personnel, pilots, even Buzz Aldrin and the story of the Stage 4 booster. I'm quite aware of the problem I face, but Reddit doesn't know me, so who cares if I sound crazy? I grant myself this one outburst. This idea about lasers burrowed into my mind, I guess. On a work trip to Singapore in 2011 I picked up a high-powered laser with a USB connection for very little. A 200 milliwatts unit with a range of 70 miles. When I got back to the UK I played around with it. I programmed into the laser a flashing of the prime number sequence on a loop from 2 to 97. I guess in using primes I'd taken some inspiration from the book and film Contact. Given that it was winter and cloudy I put it in a drawer and forgot about it, until summer came around. It was the night before the heaviest night of the Perseid meteor shower in 2012 and I always like going out every year and doing time-lapse photography, usually the kinds of shots with a wide-angle lens at 24mm showing the Milky Way moving across the sky, while meteors burn up in the atmosphere and leave their imprint on the camera sensor. But this night, because I wanted to experiment I switched to a longer lens, my trusty Canon 85mm f1. 2 liters. It's not good for this kind of time-lapse because the field of view it offers is too small to capture the majesty of the meteor shower with the Milky Way as a backdrop. Now, let me just repeat, this was an experiment. I did not have any expectations, it was purely curiosity to see what, if any, results this yielded. I guess some ideas burn into my brain and I just want to try for the sake of it. Maybe at a subconscious level I wanted to believe in something, but I don't know. It's not like if you met me and talked to me, I'm the stereotypical believer in paranormal things or some conspiracy nut. Maybe it is a little disingenuous to claim some objectivity. I just don't know. Anyway, I duct taped the laser to the camera so that its beam would be visible in the field of view of the lens. And then secured the camera on my tripod, made sure the feet of the tripod were firmly planted in the field. It wasn't a windy night, so I was sure of the stability of my setup, and then I pointed the camera straight up. I figured, if I wanted good images it was best to stick to photos. Filming doesn't ever yield good enough quality and it consumes the CF card far too fast. I always take a few test shots to make sure my focus, aperture and shutter speed settings are okay. They were fine. When checking the images on the camera screen I could see stars, everything was clear. I set the intervalometer to shoot images every second, started up the laser and the time-lapse. For the first 20 minutes nothing happened. It was okay though. I could see the Milky Way and a few meteors passing across the sky. I had my thermos full of hot chocolate. I enjoyed these kinds of nights. And then I looked up and noticed, slightly off to one side from the laser there was a light and it was very slowly circling the beam. Over the course of the next 30 minutes more lights started to appear, maybe one a minute. They moved across the sky and joined the first, orbiting the beam, almost like they'd been captured by gravity. I counted around 30 points of light. There's no way they were planes or helicopters. I couldn't hear anything except for the hum of the edge of my town about a couple miles away. They seemed quite high up, but it was impossible to assess how far up they were. But I'm certain they weren't some fireflies or other luminous insects. They all orbited the beam in concentric circles from one another, going clockwise for about 10 minutes. At first their circling was independent from one another, and then some of the points of light started to change their speed. I could see the points of light syncing up their orbits and slowly forming a pattern. It was a spiral, and it was spinning around my laser beam, and they were forming this spiral tight enough around my laser beam for the camera to capture it all. I don't know how long I was looking at this remarkable show for. The camera shot enough images for it to have been only about 3 minutes with the UFOs all cinched up into the spiral, but I could have sworn that I was watching this spin for at least 30 minutes. I just don't know. And then the relative silence out in that field was interrupted by jet engines overhead. The lights in the sky started to switch off and disappear from the outside part of the spiral all the way back to the inside, and it was just gone. I figured if they'd left, I should leave too. I packed up my gear and made my way home. It was about 4 a.m. and there was too much adrenaline in my blood to sleep. I downloaded the images I'd taken. The first 20 minutes worth of images were good, stars aplenty. I'd usually run it through Lightroom to bring out the fainter stars, but given the quality of what I'd captured, I was sure it would look amazing. And every image after the UFOs came into view was purely white. Every single image, hundreds of them. I wondered for a second if I'd burned out the sensor or if there was a defect, but I took a few images and it was absolutely fine. I changed the settings on those white photos, trying to recover some detail, but there was nothing. I have done time lapses of meteor showers since then with the same equipment and there was never any problem, but for that period of time, the most reliable piece of tech I own failed. The next day I took the dog for a walk and went my usual way, out by the field where I'd seen those lights the night before. There was a black Land Rover Defender sitting in the middle of the field and men in military uniforms looking at the spot where I'd set up. I continued walking and avoided looking at them, and now that I've written this out for the first time, well, I'm pretty sure my friends or family wouldn't believe it. As for Reddit, well, there's the reply button. When I was about 8, my mother's boyfriend took me to the batting cages. The machine shot about 5 to 10 baseballs and then you had to put more money in. I had already been batting for about a half hour and my mom's BF told me this is my last set. So I was extra focused. I started swinging away at my final set, and I shit you not, on my last ball I swung and hit it back into the machine. I couldn't believe it. I still kind of don't believe it. So I don't really expect anyone else to, I guess. But it happened. That in grade 4 I made a noise to imitate the bell before it went off. Basically screamed at the right pitch and got kids to leave for recess early. Nobody believes me. Okay, so I don't like to tell this story because it's absurdly unbelievable, like I myself don't even believe it, but my friend swears by it. A couple years ago at Bonnaroo, just after the Alt J show got out, me and my friend are coming down off some decent acid, and I decide that I could really go for a Wonder Waffle, so I'm in line waiting, and I finally get my delicious ice cream treat. When I turn around and an older gentleman says to me, "You know, there's only one place in the world you're gonna find a treat like that." I, being ever the quick-witted young lad I am, only responded with "Good, 'cause I'm starving," which didn't even make sense, and turn around to put chocolate and shit on my waffle. When I turn around, the gentleman is gone and my friend has this dumb look on his face, and while we're walking away from the WW stand he says to me, "Dude, you know who that was, right?" And I say something along the lines of, "I don't know, some old dude?" And he looks at me with the dumbest smile ever and says, "Dude, that was Paul McCartney," and I'm just standing there with this dumbfounded look on my face that says there was no way in hell that was Paul McCartney. So that's my potential encounter with Paul McCartney, and I totally understand if you don't believe me. I don't even believe it. When I was 8 I loved to climb into trees. One day it was very hot and I was playing outside in Speedos. Close to our house was a tree I just loved to climb. The branches were just perfect. This tree was surrounded by stinging nettle. You probably can guess it already. I did climb the tree the day with only my swimming trousers on. A branch broke and I fell right into the nettles. It hurt a lot. I jumped on my bike, nettled from head to toe, and in a blind panic I drove direction home. This was on a small path going downhill. I lost control over my bike, hit a pole with my head and fainted. My neighbor friend found me and she called my parents, who called 911. I was taken to hospital with a severe concussion and nettle poisoning. In my Speedo. I think I saw some kind of I dunno. Spirit or demon. Or some kind of shadow being once. I was doing some training one afternoon about 6-ish years ago. I was in an office and there was an instructor telling us all about job safety, etc. I was zoning out, not really paying attention. It was broad daylight outside. The room I was in had about 6 monitors, and on those monitors it was displaying security camera footage. Mostly the sidewalks, outside traffic. Out of the corner of my eye I caught some kind of shadow on one of the monitors, but the shadow was moving along the sidewalk very fast, and what's more, it didn't look like a shadow on the ground, it looked like a ball. A ball of shadow just drifting along the sidewalk like a tumbleweed, very fast. I caught it just out of the corner of my eye and it went off screen. I started looking at all the other screens to see if it popped up, and sure enough, it did pop up on another screen, still traveling down the sidewalk. Then it crossed the street, and I could just barely see a car stop in front of it. The shadow ball lifted up off the ground, went over the car, and then back down onto the street on the other side of the car, and on the screen I saw the car just sit there for a moment, and then take off. The shadow went completely off screen and I never saw it again. Now, as with all claims like this, it could have been anything, who knows? But it was very unsettling to see. The light would almost bend around it, wherever it would move, and it was translucent. And whatever it was, that car saw it too, and stopped. Somewhere out there, someone else saw that thing, and I'll never meet them and be able to ask if it was as weird looking as I thought it was, and truth be told, today is the first time I have ever told anyone that story. Honestly, I probably wouldn't believe me. I had a girl in middle school touch my no-no area without my consent. I always told her to stop, but being the scrawny kid in school she was stronger than me and I couldn't get her to stop. I started skipping the class I had her in and got in trouble for it just because I didn't want her touching me. I told the teacher, but of course she said girls don't do those type of things and asked the girl if I was the one harassing her. I was on a trip with my zoology class, undergrad, to the woods in Maryland. Each night we went out with a partner into total darkness. No streetlights, no nothing, dark like I've never seen. It practically had a texture when it enveloped you. This was to check our traps for mice and chipmunks. We each had like 8 traps with a ball of peanut butter and seed inside, and we'd check them every few hours so if some animal got trapped we could take them inside before they died from cold. The trap didn't hurt them, or else I would have refused to participate, it just snagged them so we could tag them. Anyway, my partner and I make it 3 miles out to our area and it's cold. So we reason we'll make it back to the cabin faster if we each split up and check our traps ASAP. She runs ahead to her area, half-mile up a dirt path, and the dark swallows her. No prob. I'm not afraid of the dark, so I've got my headlamp on and I'm checking traps one by one, at least as best as I can given that my fingers are pretty stiff. This was only the last weekend of August or 1st of September, but it was enough that you shivered inside instead of slept. I check a trap and hear a snap behind me. I looked around. Didn't see anything. Turned back to the trap. There it is again. Snap. I finally realized it was just a stick breaking somewhere a little ways away. Whatever. I start walking away from the sound to check my next trap. Snap. It sounds like it's a little closer now, actually a lot closer than a minute ago. It had gone from like 30 feet off in the dark, barely audible, to now sounding like a meager 10 feet. The woods were pretty dense, but not so dense I shouldn't be able to see it. Right? I look around. Again, all I've got is my headlamp, but that's plenty bright. I see nothing, decide I watched too much X-Files as a kid, then wander on. By the time I get to the next trap I hear it again, even closer, snap. I froze, suddenly realizing why this had been setting off alarm bells in my head this whole time. I've been in this forest for 5 days. The only thing I've heard break a stick by walking on it is a human. So it'd take a decent amount of weight to break a stick, much less be breaking sticks with almost every step. This thing I'm out alone with in the dark is heavy. I'd been warned about coyotes and mountain lions, so at this point I stopped checking traps and started speed walking toward where my partner had gone half-mile north, stopping every few seconds to spin in a circle, to check my backside and try to demonstrate to whatever was following me that I was aware of my surroundings. Snap, snap, snap. It was following me. This couldn't be real. Suddenly there she was. I turned a bend and the world filled with light again. My partner was there, headlamp on. She'd caught a chipmunk. She was ready to go back. Suddenly I felt like a total idiot, and instantly decided to tell no one of my panic attack. I am not afraid of the dark. I am not afraid of the dark. We get back without incident, no more snaps, everyone else is in the cabin waiting. No one else caught anything, so our professor decided to tag the chipmunk and take it back to its area, my partner's area, to re-release it. He dragged us all along and we followed him back up the trail I had just been on. We got to the first portion, my portion, and a student waved the professor over. We all thought she'd found something in one of my traps, but when we all circled around, it wasn't a trap, it was just on the other side of a tree from one of my traps, and it was poop. Like a giant pile of shit. My professor donned a glove and held it up for everyone to see, showing us all what black bear shit looks like. Well, at that point I couldn't tell anyone. No one would believe me. When I was little, I was playing in the backyard on a swing set with monkey bars on top of it, essentially this. I was crawling on top of the monkey bars when I lost my balance and fell headfirst towards the ground. So there I am falling, anticipating my death, when my ankle gets tied up in the rope on the swing set. I would have probably died if it weren't for that miraculous miracle. I was driving after the '04 Super Bowl, stormy night, no alcohol or anything. Highway had one lane plowed. So I am driving along. About a mile distance between me and cars from me in both directions. It's snowing but I can see well. My car was made for this shit, 4x4 big enough tires, a little top heavy, so as I am going down the road, my steering wheel all of a sudden goes crazy. Turning left then right then left, and back a few times. Caught me off guard for sure, but I couldn't stop it. The funny thing was I was still going straight, nothing wrong. White knuckles, adrenaline pumping, trying to comprehend what just happened. It happens again before I can calm down. I am hold the wheel as hard as I possibly can. It goes left, regardless of my efforts, it slams over to the right, and my rear wheels follow suit. At this moment my steering wheel unlocks, time slows down, and my experience kicks in. Start fixing it, but my car picked up speed in the other direction and just did a 300 spin, so my rear is heading to the median. As nothing I could do to fix this situation, it was clear that I was heading for some doom. But a calmness overtook me. I was going fast enough to flip my car. And if you've been in a car crash, you know the feeling of coming to a halt in an instant. Bang, my car went, stalled out from the crash. I am able to move, look back, don't see damage. Try to start my car, it starts. Looking down the road I see some cars coming. Figures to should get to the side or the rest stop a half mile up. My car is running fine and I make it to the rest stop. I pull into the first parking spot and run around the car since I am no longer in danger. Not a scratch on her, no dent, nothing. I have tried to work out what happened with my steering and how I walked away with not a scratch on my car, but I have no logical answer. I was put into peril and taken out by some force not of my own. I don't tell anyone about my past. My husband knows, some family and some former friends. That is it. I'm now very quiet, reserved and a huge introvert. I will choose a night in at home alone, with husband and child, over anything else. However, I wasn't always this way. My early 20s I was a stripper. I traveled around the country working at various clubs. I had a twin and we'd go work features for a weekend before moving on. I dabbled in drugs, ecstasy and cocaine, and quit cold turkey one day after an acquaintance who was out partying with us died after I left. I've been clean since 2008. Nobody would believe me if I told them my past. They assume that I am just a shy, boring person, and I am happy to let them see that. It would blow my in-laws' minds though. My brother was chilling in his room in the basement last summer, playing Xbox with his headphones on. He thought he heard a weird noise upstairs but just thought it was our older brother getting home since he generally sounds like a herd of elephants. He took his headphones off and heard the front door slamming. He decided to go upstairs to grab a snack and see who else was home now. He ran up the stairs and noticed the air was a little hazy. He opened the door to the garage to check for vehicles indicating that people were home, and flames came shooting out at him. Our house was on fire. Turns out the noises upstairs were from a neighbor who saw the fire and ran into the house. I had left the front door unlocked when I left 2 hours previously. The neighbor had grabbed our dog and yelled to see if anyone else was home, then ran out. The fire started in the garage and spread to the roof/attic. It melted our smoke detectors from above, so the alarms never went off. When my brother realized the house was on fire, he ran back downstairs because he thought I was still home. When he saw that I wasn't in my bedroom, he ran back upstairs, looked for our dog, then finally saw the neighbor holding her outside. He took 5 steps outside, saw that our mom's vehicle in the driveway was very close to the fire, and thought he should grab her keys to back it up. He turned around and there was fire entirely blocking the front door. Good thing. Because if he tried to start it, it may have exploded with how hot it was. He called my parents after calling 911 and my mom laughed because she thought he was joking. He wasn't. Our house burned down in the middle of the day, plus my mom's vehicle ended up lighting on fire and basically melted from the heat. The very next day, I received my acceptance letter for med school in the mail. I like to go hiking. Back about 10 years ago, I went out into western NY with a friend and my then husband. We hiked through the woods for hours and were about to make camp before the sun started to go down. We came to a river, took off our packs, and suddenly I heard our friend make a gasping noise and freeze. Across the water, perhaps 20 yards away, was a creature staring at us. It was about 8 feet tall and absolutely massive in frame and musculature. We stared at it, it stared back. It felt like forever but was probably just a minute or so. Then it turned and walked off into the woods. This broke the spell and we all tossed our packs back on and ran off the way we had come. We never stopped to camp. We didn't stop until we got back to the truck around midnight. Our friend, who lives up there, said it was a Wendigo. I have no clue if it was a Sasquatch, a Wendigo, or just some enormous dude somehow messing with us, but I will never hike in western NY again. I don't ever want to see that again. I know people would think I'm nuts, but there is no real acceptable explanation. When I was 13, my dad started drinking with my 11-year-old sister. He told me he was going out with her to get dinner and I couldn't have any. He let her drive and she totaled the car. A cop came and let him go, and when CPS came to check on us they did nothing. We told them we were okay out of fear and they closed our case. When I was about 9 or 10, my grandparents and I were living in a somewhat large town in Pennsylvania. I would ride my bike around the block we lived on and never had many problems until one day it was close to sunset and I was just about to turn the last corner that looped back to the road our house was on. A large group of people were outside of their house and they were all laughing loudly and goofing off, I assume. They decided to sort of form a wall across the sidewalk in front of me, while more of them kind of boxed me in from behind. One of them, a guy, stepped forward and grabbed my handlebars, got right in my face and started yelling at me while his friends laughed and carried on. He pushed me off of the bike onto the ground and started laughing manically. He kind of pushed the bike hard, it landed on me, and he started moving towards me again. So I jumped up, pulled my bike with me kind of into a bush on the side to get away, got on it and pedaled like hell to get home. My grandma was pretty pissed I was banged up, but thought it was my fault for being a stupid kid. About 2 weeks later I found a newspaper on the kitchen table with that guy's face on the front cover. He was arrested for killing an old lady just down the road from our house. My grandma never believed me, but I could never forget that guy's face. I was hit by a Mack truck and had my head split open 10 years ago. They put my head back together and I am fine today. Most people don't believe I was hit by a Mack truck and survived. When I say I was hit, I mean I was hit. I was not in a car or anything. The truck lunged forward and hit me while I was walking. When I lived in China, people often asked me what was different about life in the US. I told them in the US we don't keep small hot water heaters in our bathrooms. We have a large hot water heater in our basements that send hot water to every faucet in the house. I got called a liar enough times that I finally stopped bringing it up. In the US I was once asked the same question and I told them that in China they have small wall-mounted hot water heaters in their bathrooms for showers. Again I got called a liar. There is just no pleasing some people. When I was in pre-K, around Easter, we had an activity at school where we decorated Easter eggs. Now, I would assume that they were hard-boiled, but each kid got to take one home, and I remember mine being a hideous orange and yellow one. But I was cool with it, because I designed that hideous egg. At home, I played with the egg some. After a little while, I got bored and left the egg on the floor. Eventually, I returned to it, after a few hours, but to my absolute horror as a 4-year-old, my egg was broken in pieces and there was a dead chick lying in the broken pieces. I was very sad, not just because it was a poor little dead chick, but also because it would have been cool to have a pet chicken. Anyway, my parents ended up disposing of it. And I was scarred for life. Not really. That would have bothered some kids, but I was fine, lol. So, yeah, that's my story that people don't believe. Partly because I was pretty young when it happened. My sister and I have exceptional memory from a young age, though I myself don't understand how it happened, since I'm pretty sure the teachers bought the eggs from the store, and they would have been boiled before being handed over to a bunch of 4-year-olds to decorate. So I don't know how the probably already dead chick hatched and then died afterwards, unless there's some gross explanation about gases from dead stuff or something. Ick. It's believable, but at the time people didn't believe me. People would say that my town didn't have any wolves at all. But I was walking down my street in the middle of the night and a wolf is literally 5 feet away from me. I was walking one way and it was walking the other but watched me the entire time. I'm so glad my house was close. Of course now, 10 years later, people know there are wolves there. They kept telling me it was a dog. I know what a gray wolf looks like. My town has a lot of wildlife. I saw a huge moose running down my street, a deer with her baby, cougars and plenty of bears. It might not be much, but when I was a kid, my family would take one of those big boats that you can sleep on when crossing countries. It was in February so it was very cold outside so I brought my touchscreen gloves because what kid didn't enjoy to play on an iPod in freezing weather? However, when we parked our car and brought our bags to the boat I couldn't find my gloves, so my dad ran back and went looking for them. While my dad was gone I check in my pocket and there they are, my gloves. I run to tell my dad I have them but he thought I was joking, because in his hand he held a pair of touchscreen gloves, exactly my size, even with a little hole over the left pinky finger. And he found them 3 meters away from our car. Maybe this ain't so hard believing, but just the chance of it happening is insane. Not a story, but a very, very minor claim to fame. You know those oft-told jokes, the sort of basic, set-up and punchline jokes? Somebody has to come up with them, right? And yet, you can't take credit for them. If someone told you they came up with one of those Michael Jackson or Space Shuttle Challenger jokes, would you believe them? Of course not, you'd think they were a crank. That said, I came up with a joke when I was 11 years old that made it into circulation, and was retold to me a few times in later years, but I couldn't really claim credit for it. I've only told a couple people I authored it, one of them made me look him in the eye and swear that it was mine. Without further ado, I give you that joke. Why did the baby cross the road? Because it was stapled to the chicken. Know how you see those women in abusive relationships with a black eye and they're like, oh I fell down the stairs and your bullshit meter goes off? I had a black eye once. It looked like I had the snot beat out of me. I fell down the stairs. I always wanted to see a UFO. Until I actually did. When you imagine yourself witnessing a UFO, you tend to imagine that it is off in the distance, way too far to see details. That is exactly what I imagined it would be like. But when I actually did see one, I was less than 50 yards away from it. I was on a country road, all alone. Approx 11 p.m., I saw a bright light above the trees in the distance, so I drive toward it hoping to see a flying saucer. I approached closer and closer, but couldn't actually see it through the trees. Eventually, as I was driving really slow at this point, I came to a clearing where there were no trees, and I had an unobstructed view where I could see it. It was a triangle. Best way to describe it, it was hovering perfectly still, no noise whatsoever. As soon as I saw it clearly, I stopped my car, and screamed out, "What is that?" At this point, it either saw my car, or heard me scream out, because as soon as I stopped, it began to fly, or coast, smoother than any vehicle I have ever witnessed. I hit the gas and started to book it out of there, but realized it was leaving too, and I had no evidence of my story. So I busted a U-turn, started driving back toward it. Just as I approached it again, a car was heading my way. The object flew directly over the oncoming car. Whoever was driving in that car came within feet of the thing just overhead. I saw the object fly into the trees across the street from where I originally saw it. Immediately I started honking my horn, flashing headlights at the oncoming car, which was just underneath the flying object. As the car passed by mine, I was stopped in the middle of the highway at this point. The driver of the car looked at me like I was crazy. He had not seen the object fly within feet above his car. I spent several hours more looking toward the sky, from a safe distance, hoping to catch a glimpse with my camera out. Never saw it again though. My friends and I broke into a sketchy warehouse, appeared to be abandoned, out in some dark backwoods location. Anyways, we found what appeared to be an arm, and a leg, human, in a pile with a bunch of deer parts. We all agreed to never speak of it again. One time my girlfriend at the time and I got really high and meditated together. We could feel each other's energy being pulled toward each other, like our souls were dancing. It sounds crazy, but we both know what we felt. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.